Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to our Academisation webinar. It's ECM in conjunction with Mitchell Charlesworth. I think lots of you know myself. I'm Phil Choi from ECM, and I'm going to just introduce the sessions that we've got for you this morning and go through the agenda and give you an idea as to what's coming this morning. So hopefully it'll be informative and you'll enjoy this. Grab a cup of tea, grab a drink, grab some refreshments and enjoy the session. If you don't mind, I'd just like to go through a couple of housekeeping aspects with you. First of all, if you can't hear anything, or if you're having any difficulties with your computer or with this session, please just make a call to 0330 221 9922 using the access codes here. If you've got any technology issues, I've had quite a few this week. But the best one that works for me is turn it off and start again. And if things still don't work out, not to worry, because all of this session is being recorded and we will send you a copy of the recording and you'll be able to access it that way. Throughout the session, we're going to give you a lot of information. Please, if you've got any questions, just put them in the chat. We'll keep them logged. Amanda, who's in the background, who will be solving any of our technical issues, she'll collate all of that chat and put those through to us with the intention of answering the questions right at the very end. So you want to keep the flow, you want to keep everything moving, but please, as any questions arise, put them in the chat and we will get to them after Steve's session at the end. Okay, in terms of evaluation, at the very end of the question and answer session, when we finished our presentation, we would really appreciate it if you could complete a very short survey stroke evaluation. And this will help us follow up any of your requests and queries. So please look out for that right at the end. Okay, agenda, here we go. So what we're going to look at first of all is just a bit of a heads up from myself and my colleague Sarah McTeer-Smith. We know you're going to be presented with a lot of information, really useful information from both Alex and Steve. And what we want to do is give you a heads up about some aspects of support that might be useful at any time now going forwards. So we're going to give you some information about ECM and Scoot. Then Alex Makinson, one of the partners from Mitchell Charlesworth, is going to run through lots of the nitty-gritty and detail and information about Academisation. And I think some of you may remember quite a few years ago when Academisation was first introduced, we asked Alex to help a lot of our schools in that transition towards becoming an academy. And lots of schools have benefited from his wisdom and know-how. So we're really pleased to be working with Alex again. And after Alex has presented his session, Steve Docking, the CEO from Northwest Academies Trust, is very kindly going to present the trust perspective on academies and multi-academy trusts. We've known Steve for a very long time, and it's been a real pleasure watching his academy trust grow from the times when I sat in his very beautiful and small successful village school in Delamere to where they are now. So it's really pleasing to see that journey, and I think lots of other people would be interested to hear that also. As I said, after Steve's presentation, we'll have a question and answer session, and then we hope that you can complete some evaluations and forms right at the end. Okay, ECM and Scoot, just very briefly, some solutions and support. As Alex moves through this presentation, he'll talk about things like due diligence, and due diligence can take the form of finance, it can be due diligence in lots of other areas. And what we do at ECM is we can provide leadership partner support, the old SIP, school improvement partner. We can also provide school reviews to help you and your colleagues have a clearer picture as to the to the position that your school is in currently and areas to work on. And we think that as you get to know your clusters of schools, your groups of schools and your partners, it's not a bad idea to know who you're working with and where everybody's up to in terms of their school improvement. So that's what we do at ECM in terms of leadership partners and school reviews. If you want any support from ECM, we've got the contact details there below, bookings at ecmeducationconsultants.co.uk, and also on the website, www.ecm-education.co.uk. There's a page on the website which says latest offers, and on the first page underneath latest offers, there is an Academisation page, which will have all of the latest Academisation documentation that's been made available, so it's all in one place for you folks to access. We're also going to put on there this recorded session that will be on, and we're also going to put on information such as Steve is going to present later on from different multi-academy trusts, so that everybody can access information and find out about different ways different trusts work and operate. That will be there for you on our website. In terms of Scoot, what I would like to do is, first of all, introduce Sarah McTeer-Smith. Sarah is my colleague at Scoot, who, if anybody's interested in any additional training, because as you know, ECM does face-to-face training, that's not going to go away, face-to-face training and online live training. We also have moved our online training all to our new platform, Scoot. It's an on-demand training platform which has got all of the same material that we've used with ECM. It's on demand, it can be accessible at any time. It's available for all members of the school staff, all school team, individual schools, maths, groups of schools. There's a great 5-minute web video on www.scoot.co.uk, and that will give you a really good overview as to how this on-demand training can support you in your school. And if you want any support with that, Sarah McTeer-Smith will more than happily go through and give you a proper demonstration. Benefits of Scoot training: it's fantastic value for money. You can access it anytime you like. It doesn't replace what goes on in terms of face-to-face or on live training. There are onboarding guides and materials that help you work your way through, so it's very intuitive, it's very easy to follow, and there is a full guidance and support for your CPD leader to make sure that you get the best use out of this on-demand training. Further benefits of Scoot training: there's a massive catalogue. At the moment, I think it says on this slide there are 75 training courses. I think there's actually 150 now. You can use the training any way to suit. You can do it in small modules, and do it half an hour at a time, an hour at a time. You can do it for a full day. And all of that material has been put together by experienced, qualified practitioners and experts in their field. And we know from the feedback from lots of our colleagues in school that this training meets all of your staff needs, all of the CPD needs. It's great for utilising and making the best use of your time in terms of being able to do it at the time that suits you. So good for well-being. And the materials are the same high quality materials that we've always had from ECM. Everything's there for you, all of the resources. And it all ties in nicely to what was said in the white paper about excellent teachers and how we can support excellent teachers in their CPD. One of the things that schools have asked us to make sure is a feature of this platform is that leaders want to be able to assign training to staff, be able to have an overview of what staff are accessing, what courses they would like lots of members of the team to do. So if there was one course they would want everybody to do, they would assign that course to the whole of the team. And also there might be some statutory training or other aspects of training they want people to prepare for, staff meetings, etc. And they can make sure that everybody knows that they need to access that training. As I just touched on very briefly, Sometimes in schools, we've got to do specific statutory training, and we've teamed up with Flick, and any moment now, within June, the full programme of our statutory and non-statutory training will be landing on our platform, and this is about 40 courses. There's a list of those courses here, which includes first aid training, safeguarding, all of the training that normally schools have been telling us that they've had to go running around to other providers to find. This is all part of the package of Scoot. You don't have to pay any extra. It's all within that price package. You know, it's a bargain. We've got lots of happy customers, lots of people who can provide testimonials, lots of head teachers, lots of leaders. They're all on our website. If you want any recommendations or testimonials, we can also provide those for you too. And I know lots of people who are listening today are already members of Scoot. What's really impressed us over the last 6 to 12 months as we introduced this in September is the different ways that schools are using the Scoot platform. So as I say, some schools are directing staff to particular training courses because there are so many, it can be quite overwhelming at first. Some are using them for inset days, so it's a cheap and effective way of running an inset day. And the same also for staff meetings. You know, lots of schools are using the materials to run their own staff meetings. They don't need to prepare any PowerPoints, they don't need to prepare any materials because it's all there available for everybody. So it's a great opportunity for schools to make efficient use of the CPD plan. One of the features that I'm not going to go into detail now is about collaboration and the collaborative elements of Scoot. That will come. It is available. Schools are just trying to get their heads around how they can best use that. For example, history subject leaders in a cluster or a mat could come together on the platform and share resources, ideas, plan deep dives together, do peer reviews, etc., etc. So that's really exciting. In terms of pricing, it's, as I said, it's really good value for money. Typical one form entry school is about £1,488 for 30 adults, 30 members in the school. So you're looking at about £50 per person a year, which is a bargain for CPD. If you want to subscribe and you think, wow, I'd like to do it now straight away, if you go to www.scoot.co.uk, it will take you through the process and you can do it immediately. If you want further information and you'd like Sarah to spend a little bit of time with you, just go through it with you and show you the actual platform working as such, please get in touch with her and she'd be more than happy to go through that with you. And the same for myself, John or Mark, we'd happily do the same also. That's everything to do with Scoot. Thank you for joining today, and I would like to hand it over to Alex.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear and see me. Thank you very much, Phil, for that. Now on to the really interesting session, and I say that with my tongue in cheek there, because obviously I know what's coming here. So a little bit about myself. I'm going to take you through the session first of all. It's going to be quite a long one, so forgive me. This should last about an hour. I'm going to try to engage as much as I possibly can with you here. Who am I? Well, as Phil has introduced me, my name's Alex Makinson. I've been dealing with the educational sector for all of my career, which is sort of 22, 25 years plus. It makes me sound very, very old, to be honest. I've helped every single type of school you can probably think of, from secondary to primary, from mainstream to academies, from special schools to faith schools. I myself have been a governor and a trustee. I've worked with all of those types of schools. I've also been invited on many IEBs to try and support and help lots of challenging schools, interesting schools, and schools that obviously needed some help and support. So hopefully that gives me enough experience to enable myself to talk to you a little bit about the topic today. My day job actually is I'm a boring old accountant. I'm a partner at Mitchell Charlesworth Accountants, and one of our key sectors is education. We support a lot of schools. a lot of further educational colleges, that'll be private schools as well, and obviously academy trusts, because they all need accountants, they all need auditors at the end of the day. Now, I'm here today to talk to you about the white paper, and I'm here today to talk to you about academisation. I'm going to whiz through a lot of things here today, and please feel free to ask as many questions as you want within the chat box. I will try to answer them all at the very end as much as I can. If I can't and we run out of time, I will come back to you. And please feel free to call me or contact me by email if you've got any personal questions that you just want to talk over on those sort of things. So we're going to go through the white paper, which obviously is the opportunity for all paper. We're going to talk about where we are now, what's different, what are the options available for you. Moving on to converting to academy status. I'm not here to sell academies to you. I'm not pro-academisation, I'm not against academisation. This is all about learning. This is all about you having enough information in your hand to enable you to make informed decisions for you, for your schools, and deciding what is right for you. I'm going to move on to financial reporting requirements. It's a major issue. It's a major topic for academies. It's so different compared to mainstream schools. I'm going to talk about top slicing, gag pooling, and centralisation, so we all understand the terms. What are they? What do we need to know? What do we need to consider when we're having conversations with other schools and potentially other trusts? I'm going to move on to pension scheme liabilities, because I always get lots of questions asked about pension scheme liabilities. So it's worthwhile just spending a little bit of time making sure you know what they are, what the considerations are, what you need to consider there, and whether there are any impact both pre and post academisation, if that's the route you choose to go down. And then we're going to move on to due diligence, which Phil has very kindly just touched upon. We're going to spend a bit of time on due diligence because it's a big topic area. It's one of the most important things you have to do when you're considering all of this. Would you believe what you're doing now is due diligence? It is you doing checks on what you need to do here. And then we'll finish off with systems, software, and reports at the very end, before I pass over to the really exciting bit, which is obviously the trust perspective with Steve Docking. So let's move on to the white paper itself. And what did it say? Well, obviously, I'm going to focus on chapter 4, which was disclosed as the stronger and fairer school system. And I'm going to cherry pick that one paragraph that obviously has put the cat amongst the pigeons again. We can't argue about this, which by 2030, all children should benefit from being taught in a family of schools within a strong multi-academy trust. And I specifically highlighted and underlined a couple of things here, because I think what you'll find throughout my presentation and what you will find throughout the whole of the white paper is definitely a selling point. It is the white paper trying to sell a system to you. That system is academies, that system is academisation. And you'll see there's lots of pro comments here when it comes to academies. And you'll see in that one paragraph, benefiting from being taught in a family of schools within a strong multi-academy trust. These are some of the things actually you'll see as we progress through my presentation. There's lots of positives being mentioned in the white paper, which feels to me very much like a sales pitch to you when it comes to what the DfE, the SFA want you to do and your school. So where are we now when it comes to the academy system itself? And the first thing we need to recognise is that a milestone has been reached. A tipping point, some people may say. What is that tipping point? That tipping point now is that more children are educated in the academy system than they are in the mainstream system. So we've passed that threshold. That's a big threshold. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have this white paper focusing on academisation yet again. If we look at some of the clear numbers, well, actually slightly less schools are converted than actually have children educated. That is because we have a lot of secondary schools that are academies. The vast majority of secondary schools are academies. When it comes to the primary sector, a little bit less so. So around about 10,000 schools that we have in the country, I think it's about 45% on our academies, Although obviously we've tipped over 50% of children now taught in academy schools, because obviously of those schools, a lot are primary that are still not converted here. Now we do have a focus on faith schools. This paper is always talking about faith schools here because the department realised and government realised there are 4,000 faith schools that are yet to convert, and they want to focus on those faith schools, try to convert those faith schools into academies, and then that leaves us with about 8,000 left over there. So let's talk about academies as well and the system itself. Like any system, we have high performing trusts, we have underperforming trusts, and we have everything in between. It's not a silver bullet to academisation here. There are good trusts, there are bad trusts, there are high performing trusts, there are not high performing trusts here. It very much sounds just like any other local authority, really, when it comes to the sector. When it comes to what's happened over the last couple of years with academisation and the system, well, conversions have slowed. Obviously, we've had COVID. That's had a major impact on conversion to academy status. Why? Because you've had better things to worry about, more important things to deal with. Did you really want to think about academisation? Was it the right time? No. So obviously, we've got a little bit of a slowing in the conversions to academies, but actually, we've had a lot of consolidations over the last year or two. We've seen a lot of single academy trusts, or what I call single mats with just one school in them, consolidating and actually joining up with other mats to become bigger mats, to find this sort of sweet spot, the economy of scale by having such a larger mat that you can have when you have sort of 10 or 12 schools within a mat, which is mentioned in the white paper itself. Now, if I move on to what's different now, what's different? We all remember the old white paper, the Nicky Morgan white paper that came out in 2016 that said all schools will be academies by 2022. And lo and behold, here we are now in 2022, and we've got a new white paper. Now, recall there was a huge backlash with the white paper. There was a massive U-turn. Now, I'm going to mention that U-turn in a second. And obviously there was an issue with legislation around it as well. Now, I was at an event the other night and someone described it quite well here. Is they said, look, that white paper, yes, there was huge backlash. Yes, Nicky Morgan got some horrible comments made about her and even received some death threats, would you believe? It's a very emotive subject of academisation. You love it, you hate it, but one thing you've got to do now, I'm afraid, is embrace it whether you like it or not. And that person I was speaking to actually said it wasn't really a U-turn. Lots of people thought it was a U-turn, but actually it was more like a Z-turn, he said. The reality is the direction is still pointing towards everybody being academies. It's just that the trajectory is taking a little bit longer. It's going to be a bit of a slower process rather than this forced process that obviously didn't go down at all well in the sector. Now, what is also different? Well, according to the white paper, if you read it, there is a rating of standards. 86% of schools are now good or outstanding compared to 67 in 2010. They seem to be resting that on academies, rightly or wrongly there. I'm not sure whether I agree with some of the comments that are made in this white paper, and I'm sure you probably don't as well. But you'll see they are painting this picture, and this picture is one of academisation, I'm afraid. It said in the white paper 7 out of 10 sponsored academies are now good or outstanding compared to 1 in 10 in local authority maintained schools. I don't know whether I agree, but it's there. It's in black and white, really. So they definitely are trying to say there is a reason for you to convert. You should be converting, and the data's there. But being an accountant myself, I know that you can make data fit a need. You can also manipulate it to give you a result that you want it to say here. So you do have to take some of these percentages and some of these things with a little bit of a pinch of salt, really. And that works both ways for mainstream and for academies. When it comes to the white paper itself, the DfE has chosen their words very, very carefully. And it's a very focused white paper. And I put a lot of things on the screen here about some of the comments that they've made in the white paper. But very rarely does it say local authority and mainstream. It always seems to be focusing on academies, rightly or wrongly. And I don't know whether I like it, but it's all there. It's saying that there's a benefit from high quality development in academies. The best trusts achieve strong outcomes for disadvantaged pupils. Trusts deliver outstanding outcomes. My opinion, schools deliver outstanding outcomes. Good schools, it doesn't matter whether you're an academy or not, a good school, an outstanding school delivers outstanding outcomes here. But the focus here is all about presenting a picture to you about academisation and trying to entice you, trying to sell it to you almost. That actually, this is what's happening in the sector. It is good, and you should be on the journey towards it. Now, moving on to converting to academy. As I said before, I'm not here to sell academisation to you. I'm not pro academisation. It all depends on what is right for the school. I've sat in a mainstream as a governor and said, you know what, it's not right for our school at this time. Why? Because we had other things to deal with. But the one thing that's potentially changed now is I don't think I can make that decision now and come to the same conclusion. And I'll go through the options that are available to you now, knowing where we are now compared to 2016 and knowing what options we have available. So what are the options that we have now? So the first option we have is forced into a trust, and I'm going to go into each one of these options a little bit later in the slide. The second option is we join an existing trust that's out there. We could come together with a load of other schools and form a trust, or we could wait for our local authority to establish a trust and join theirs, or we could do what an awful lot of people did after the last white paper in 2016, was actually do nothing, wait and see where we lie, see where it's going, sit back, relax, don't do anything, and then make a decision if we need to. So they're the options. Now I'm going to launch a poll in a minute, which means I can have some interaction between you and I, hopefully here, and you actually get to do something. You get to click a button on the screen. So I will caveat these polls. Sometimes I'm afraid they don't work if you're on a laptop, on an iPad or some sort of tablet. Laptops work very, very well. And obviously, if you're downloading this webinar and it's not live, you will not have access to the poll feature here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a poll in a few moments' time. I'm going to ask you, if you had to take a decision today for your school, what would you choose to do today? At this moment in time, reading that white paper without listening to anything I'm going to say in a few moments' time, click a button. I suspect no one's going to click the top one because you don't want to be forced into another trust. What would you do if you had to make a decision today? Would you join an existing trust? Would you form a trust with others? Would you join a local authority trust? And would you do nothing? Now, no one else gets to see what you've chosen. We will publish the results in a few moments' time in its entirety to see where people sit. I have no idea what this poll is going to tell us, but I'm going to leave it open just for a few seconds so you can click a button and hopefully it's all working your end. And then we will share exactly what is going on with your views and share them with everybody else. So I think my team in the background should hopefully close that now. So that should close. And then we'll try and share the results. Okay, so here are the results. I have them on my screen and you have them on your screen. So we've got 18% thinking about joining an existing trust. We've got 36% thinking about forming a trust with other schools. 9% thinking that the option is the local authority, and we've got 38% doing nothing. Well, oddly, that's almost what I expected, to be honest. A big chunk of people saying we're going to sit back, see what happens. Probably the one that surprises me a little bit here is the local authority. I thought more people may choose to wait for the local authority, but they may have realized that actually may not be an option. And obviously, we've got a big chunk thinking about forming trusts with others. Now, if I remember a little bit later after my slides, I may bring this poll up a little bit later, and we may be able to see whether your views have changed when it comes to some of those options. So hopefully my team will close that poll now, and we'll get back to the slides, and I can click some buttons on the slides now. So let's talk about each one of those options that you have available to you. So we've got option one, which is forced into a trust. We all know that unfortunately, if you have an awful Ofsted, I'll leave it at awful as being the word there, you will be forced into academisation. You'll be forced to convert, and you'll be placed with a trust, and your destiny, sadly, is outside of your hands. I certainly never agree with that, but I'm afraid I don't write the rules. We just have to follow them here, and it's still there. You may have noticed in the white paper that there's a consultation about placing double RI schools into strong trusts. I've got a sneaky suspicion that consultation will be short, sweet, and will go through. What will that mean? That will mean that more schools with a double RI will have that forced academisation tag attached to them, and they will be placed with a trust. Again, your destiny is taken away from you there. Not very nice. Not an option I would want to take for any of my schools. Then we've got the joining of the existing trust. I hope you like the lovely pictures on the right side, by the way, so it'll give you an indication of what we're talking about here. So it's all about doing your due diligence. Now, I'm not going to labour on due diligence now because we've got it as a specific point a little bit later to go through. But this is you thinking about joining an existing trust. So we've got obviously Steve talking about Northwest Academies Trust a little bit later on there, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his trust. But it's you joining a trust like Steve's or another one. There are lots of them out there. Then we've got, well, before I do, I would like to mention the try before you buy, because not many people do know about this, to be honest. This is where you have an option to actually see whether that trust is right for you. So you're not signed up to them, you're not committed to them in their entirety. Maybe actually you've done all your due diligence, you've done all your checks, you're almost happy with them, but you want to see how it's going to go. You're not fully convinced. Well, you can do that. You can try before you buy. You can only do it once, I'm afraid. And at the end of it, you really should either be joining them or a different mat. But it is there, and it is a consideration at the moment if you're not 100% convinced that you can work together or that trust is right for you, but you'd like to give it a go. Then we've got the forming the trust option. This is where obviously you're coming together with other schools to form your old trust, and I put the lovely building blocks of a trust on the right hand side there. Now I've got two things I want to discuss with you when it comes to forming your own trust. One is minimum size, the other is time frame. So the first thing is the minimum size. I'm going to talk about that one first of all. I often get asked, what is the minimum size of trust? Now, if you asked me that question 3-5 years ago, that figure would have been a very small size. You might have got away with 2, you might have really got away with 1. Now, what is the minimum size? You're lucky if you get away with 6. So that's 6 primary schools I'm talking about here, coming together to form a trust. Can you get that through the RSC? You might get it through the RSC. They might certainly say they want 1 or 2 more there. But that's quite hard to do. 6 schools that you're wanting to work with, you're wanting to form a trust with. You must have the same sort of ethos and culture about. It's not easy to get 2 or 3 people and trusts and governing bodies working together, never mind 6. The second thing I put on here is time frame, because we've spoken about this option with lots of other professionals. We've spoken about it with educational experts. We've spoken about it with the RSC department. And it's all about the time frame of forming a trust. We do think there is a limited time frame to form trusts. There's lots of conversations going on in the background now with schools coming together, joining existing trusts, forming other trusts. In 18 months, 2 years' time, I think we'll have a lot more trusts being formed. If at that point in time you think, actually, you know what, I think we better form a trust now with some other schools, you may have missed the boat. Because the RSC will turn around and say, actually, there's a lot of good trusts in your area. Lots have been set up. We don't want you to form a trust. Go and join one of theirs. You're now left with option 2. You've got to join an existing trust rather than created one. We do think there's a lifespan. I can't tell you what that lifespan is when it comes to forming an existing trust. It will really depend on what's happening in your area. How many trusts are being set up? How many trusts are already there? What is the timeline on those trusts? But I will tell you one thing. If you want to set a trust up with others and you wait to see how things are going, you may end up missing the boat. And that's really hard to think about, to be honest, because lots of people in that sort of do nothing, wait and see, and I was there in 2016, I would hate to be one of those people now where actually I chose to do nothing, to sit back, Lots of other trusts have been formed in the background and we hear about them when they're formed. Now we're left with no option but actually to join an existing trust rather than create and form and develop our own. I'm not sure whether I'd be happy to be in that boat, but it is a decision that you need to think about. On the next slide, I've got specifically the other two options I mentioned. One is join a local authority trust established by them. And I've pulled out something from the white paper here that says local authorities will be able to establish a new multi-academy trust where too few trusts exist. So I'm going to take that latter bit first of all, where too few strong trusts exist, first of all. Can a local authority create a trust tomorrow? Well, I think what you'll find is lots of schools are coming together to form their own trusts. So how can the RSC decide that there's not enough strong trusts at the moment for a local authority to create their own? There's going to be a lot of waiting and seeing here before even a local authority can establish their own trust. But that's not the main problem. The main problem is around that word establish, really. Why? Because every trust as it stands at the moment is regulated the same way. That means there are limits on local authority involvement on the trust board. If you don't understand what I mean by trust board, the board of trustees are the ones that control the trust, that control the schools within. They have all the power effectively. So if there are limitations on local authority involvement, how can they be controlling a local authority trust? You can't. They can establish one, but they can't control it. I put here in front. They can set it up, but it can't be run by them. Why can't it be run by them? When the reality is, when it comes to board representation here, the normal is to have somewhere between 10 and 12 trustees. And a local authority can have, it's actually 19%, less than 20%, 19% on that board of trustees. So their representation on the board of trustees is technically 1.9 persons, less than 2 people. If you've got less than 2 people out of 10 and 12, how do you have control? How can you run it? How can you support it? It's practically impossible to do so. So when I read this in the white paper, I think, hold on, what's it all about? Currently, you can't do it. You can't have a local authority running a trust. Yes, it can set one up. Yes, it can say schools work together. We'll help you set this one up. We'll help you work together. That's establishing it. Will they actually run that trust? No, not at the moment, unless some rules change, and it would have to be quite a significant change of the rules to allow local authorities to technically run that trust. So as it stands, that option, whilst in the white paper, I find it very difficult to see that's a true option. I think that's just about trying to please certain people here and say, actually, we're going to try and encourage local authorities to maybe get schools to work together. But what will be the local authority representation on that board of trustees? It might be 2 people, 2 out of 10. 8 of the people will be running the trust. That cannot be a local authority controlled trust. It may be a local authority established one. If I get onto the do nothing and the wait and see option that we've got, a lot of people want to say, let's see what's going on. We don't want to knee jerk here. It's very emotive subject. We need to make sure it's right for our school, our children at the end of the day. Let's sit back. And I've spoken to a lot of head teachers who said, I'm going to sit back. I'm just going to assess what's going on. The difficult thing is, for how long? Because for every day, for every week, for every month you do nothing, the reality is some of your options are going to be taken away from you. I cannot see the same consequences from this white paper as we had from the previous white paper. We are not seeing the same sort of backlash. We've tipped the balance in favour of academies in too many areas. There's no way of dialing that back, I'm afraid. I've even had head teachers say to me, well, I'm going to retire in 3 years. It's not my problem. And I get very upset when I hear that, because I'm afraid just because you're thinking about retiring in 3 years doesn't mean it's not your problem. You have to think about your options. Think about what you have, what you can do, what's right for your school, what's right for all your stakeholders, what's right for your children, what's right for the parents here. And think about all of these options. I don't think doing nothing, definitely in the medium term, and most certainly in the long term, is a real solution going forward. Short term, well, depends on what your do nothing is all about. If we're talking about collating information, then obviously yes, but that's not really doing nothing. That's still you assessing what you want to do and collating information. So I think after hearing all that, I don't know whether that changes your views on what you are going to do. Probably not, but I'm going to ask the team whether they can actually run that poll again now. So hopefully the team in the background can run the poll again, and it'll be up on your screen in a few moments' time. Again, just click where you think you're going to do. I suspect most people won't change their mind and go, actually, I'm going to still stay with the local authority, or I'm still going to stay with do nothing, or going to form a trust. Again, I'm just going to leave that open just for a few moments, just to enable you to click it, and hopefully we'll close that down in a few seconds. A little bit longer there. Okay, we'll close that down now. So my team in the background will sort of close that down and share it. Okay, now then. Ooh, interesting. We have had a bit of movement there. Didn't expect a lot of movement, but we've got some movement here. You'll see that join the local authority trust has actually dropped down. It's gone down to 2% because people are going, actually, you know what? I realise our local authority can't run a trust anymore. They might be able to set one up. They might be able to help us talk to other schools within the local authority. They might have some representation on the board, which is great because my local authority is amazing and I still want to work with them. And that's a wonderful position to be in for your local authority there. But that has actually fallen down. Do nothing, with a few people dropping off to do nothing, and a few more people actually going into the other two options there. So there has been a bit of a change, really. So obviously you have listened to what I've been saying here when it comes to your options there. I'm not sure whether you like to hear those options. I don't like taking options away from people. And I'm not saying I like what is being presented to you here, but it is all about fact finding. So let's close that poll and I'll move on. The one joys about webinars is I don't get to see whether you're interested in the slides and the sessions I'm running here. I'm afraid I'd rather have face-to-face, and I can see actually whether you want me to slow down, spend a little bit longer on an area, or whether you want me to speed up and whiz through it because you're finding it a little bit dull and boring. But hopefully this is all interesting for you. So how to convert, really. If you're thinking about converting or you have to convert, or maybe you're thinking about joining another trust or forming your own trust, you still have to convert to Academy status, whatever choice that one is, really. And it's quite a complex process, I'm not going to lie, but thankfully you have lots of professionals around you that can help support you. What do you need when it comes to professionals? Well, accountants, lawyers, you need the local authority to work with, the DFE, the RSC, the schools you're working with, and lots of schools engage with a consultant, an educational consultant, a conversion to consultant to work with the schools and effectively bring all those professionals together to help you convert, to draw up everything that you need. If you're joining a trust, it's just about academisation. If you're forming a trust, then you've got lots of structural issues to put in place as well. Procedures, policies. So it's a little bit more time consuming, a little bit more complicated if you're forming rather than joining. Now, there are lots of things out there still. There's still lots of funds available. The startup grants are still there. If you're starting up, there are growth grants for existing multi-academy trusts to take on other schools. I often get asked, how much does it cost to convert? You know, a startup grant, £25,000 is what you get to convert. Should it cost £25,000? No, it should not. And I get very upset when people say to me, Alex, you know what, the lawyers have cost me 25,000. I go, gulp, which lawyer did you choose and what the heck happened? No, there's nowhere, you shouldn't get anywhere near that sort of figure when it comes to converting. There is always a complication. There's always something that needs to be ironed out. You know, one complication might be that one of the schools that you're joining up with is maybe a PFI school. So they've got a complication around that. Or maybe another one is a church school, and therefore they've got a license to have in relation to their grounds and building rather than a lease, and therefore it's slightly different structure. So there's always a slight complication there, but that fund should more than cover the conversion and actually enable you to do a couple of other things with it as well. There are certain rules around what you can spend that money on. There's lots of things you have to go through when it comes to conversion. I'm not going to talk through all of those lovely bubbles on the screen there, but governance, finance, structure, trustees. They're just the barest of basics. Supplier agreements, leases, transferring over the staff, pension liabilities, reporting. Wow, the list goes on and on when it comes to considerations. And I will point into the direction of all the things you do need to consider when you are converting, when we get on to due diligence. Now I'm going to move on to financial reporting for multi-academy trust, because it is such a big area. It's so different, I'm afraid, for academies than it is with mainstream. Academies have much more rigor around them, not just financial rigor. It seems to be rigor in virtually every other department, really. And maybe that's why the government seems to like them to a certain degree, because there's a lot more checks, there's a lot more balances going on here. The one thing that you have to do if you're an academy is you have to follow the Academy Trust Handbook that I put on the screen. It used to be called the Academy Financial Handbook. They've dropped the financial. I got very upset when I saw that. It's now the Trust Handbook. Why is that? Well, there's less financial aspects of it. There's more rules, there's more regulations, but it's not all about the numbers. It's not all about pounds, shillings, and pence here. It's more about what you do than how you do it, really. And what does that say in the handbook? Well, it gives you all those rules and regulations, all the must-dos, the must-haves, the must-don't, of which there are lots, to be honest, and some of them are rather bizarre. And I'll give a classic example. Maybe your school have had a really bad year and your governors have done an amazing job. As a thank you, you bought them all a bottle of wine. Thank you very much. You know, I've been a governor and, you know, my school has very kindly bought me a bottle of wine at one point, I'm sure. And I said, thank you very much, wasn't needed, and please give it to a member of staff. But I have seen it happen. Well, from an academy, you can't do that. You're not allowed to purchase alcohol, I'm afraid. The only alcohol you're allowed to purchase is for religious reasons. So church schools are allowed for religious purposes, but you're not allowed to buy alcohol. It's a very bizarre requirement. And there are lots of little things within that handbook. They're not there to catch you out. They are there to try and protect you and guide you at the end of the day. But there's some very bizarre things in there that you have to comply with. And I'll give you another example. Maybe you've got some very good governors, and one of them maybe runs an IT company. And as a result, he may have in the past, when you're a mainstream school, provided you with all your IT equipment, maybe not at cost, but certainly heavily discounted from retail price, that you couldn't get those computers and laptops anywhere else. But you were more than happy to buy them off him because you went out to tender and he was the cheapest price by a mile, because he liked supporting his school, he liked giving back. But that's great for a mainstream. You can't do it with an academy school. There are related party restrictions. That means that individual can either only provide you with those computer equipment either at cost or not at all, I'm afraid. It's not right. I don't agree with certain things there, but they're the rules. I'm afraid I don't write them. I just have to ensure you follow them, really. If I move on to the financial reporting requirements for multi-academy trusts, we have a document called the Academy's Accounts Direction. This sets out all of the financial requirements of the trust. Now, as a trust, and I'm going to get a little bit technical here, so please forgive me here. Academies are exempt charities and companies. What does that mean? They are governed by the Companies and Charities Act, their laws, regulations, and you must follow that Academy Trust Handbook on the previous slide I've just mentioned. That means it's inherently complicated. What do you have to do? Well, you have to do a full set of complicated accounts each year. Those accounts run to the 31st of August. So March goes out the window. So if you're used to doing everything to March with a local authority, if you convert, it's all at August. It does follow the academic year, which is one benefit there. But there's a huge requirement here with regard to those full financial statements. Those statements are 60 pages long. They are huge, they are complex. That's why you need, unfortunately, myself and accountants to help you prepare these. The skill set you will have in-house with your school business managers and your bursars, they will not be able to do these things, I'm afraid. Even if you went out and get qualified accountants, a lot of qualified accountants even struggle to prepare these financial statements. They are that complex, I'm afraid. What do you have to ensure that these statements do? Well, they have to be prepared and they have to be audited. In other words, accountants like myself have to come in and check that they're right. So gone are the days of consistent financial reporting and you just uploading things to the local authority and go, that's their problem, and they never come checking. Every year you will have accounts prepared. Every year you'll have an audit, making sure that those accounts are right. Every year your accountant, your auditor will be checking that you followed all of those horrible rules within the Academy handbook. And if you don't follow them, there's consequences. There's consequences of doing so. There are reports that have to be written. You have to hold your hand up and say, I'm really sorry, we didn't do that, or we forgot to do that, but it's okay. We put things in place to make sure we don't do it next year. And those accounts have to be submitted to the department at the end of December. So you can imagine year ends August, they have to be prepared, submitted by December, and someone goes and puts Christmas in there as well. It's quite a short, tight window. So if you're thinking about forming a trust rather than actually joining a trust, then you have to think about your financial systems and your finance team to enable you to be able to do these things, because it's a fundamental change. And you may have some very capable school business managers and bursars. Well, this is a massive skill jump. Some may be very capable, but unfortunately are unable to do this. Some may say, I'll give it a go. But in reality is, you certainly have to have an auditor to check these things. Some of the other key financial and reporting requirements when it comes to academies, and I'll go through very briefly some of these. The land and buildings collection tool. The department needs to know everything about your land and building. You have to submit a form to them every year. It's horrible, I hate to tell you. The Academy's accounts return, another document that you've not done as a mainstream, you do have to do as an academy. Those accounts from the previous page, even though they're 60 pages long, well, the department says it doesn't give us enough information. So what does it do? It asks you to fill in another form called the Academy's accounts return, breaking down some of the income, some of the expenditure, some more of the costs. Then you have other things that you have to do. The school resource self-assessment tool, which is all about benchmarking. That's quite a new tool there. It's quirky. It'll suddenly tell you you're really good in one area. On the next page, it'll tell you you're appalling in the same area. So it is developing, but you do have to submit it every year. And it will, I think, give you some resources to look at going forward, i.e. it will tell you actually you're spending more on energy than an average school of your size and nature there. So it will move in the right direction. Just give it a bit of time to develop. Yes, you've still got to do budget returns every year. It's more formal for academies. And I put in one of the bubbles here, teachers spend pension scheme end of year certificate. What is that? Well, every year, and I'm going to talk about pensions in a few moments' time, you deduct money from your teachers and you pay it into the teacher's pension scheme. You write a check out, happens in the background. Someone sorts it out, maybe the bursar, maybe the payroll team sort it out for you. Whereas an academy, you have to have all of that checked. You have to have it all audited to make sure actually you have deducted the right percentage. You have paid over the right amount. Does that happen at the moment for mainstream? I've never seen anybody check a mainstream pension contribution before. Going to move on swiftly to top slicing now. I always get asked, especially from mainstream schools, over what's top slice? What's it all about? Can you tell me a little bit about it, Alex? How is it calculated? What does my current local authority top slice? How much do they take off me? And it's a really hard thing to explain, to be honest. Trying to ascertain what local authorities top slice in itself is really difficult. How much do they take of the money for the school? It's really hard to ascertain, to be honest. But one thing that you'll be doing if you choose to either join a trust or to form a trust is to look at the top slice. The top slice is the amount of money that your central team is taking to provide you with certain services. Those services might be to perform all of those financial functions that you now have to do. It might be to provide certain services that you think is beneficial to do centrally rather than individually. And that top slice is about paying for all of those services. How is it calculated? Well, we do a benchmarking report every year where we assess all of the academies that we act for and a lot of others that we don't act for as well. And we produce some data on that, and then we share it with people to see actually this is the trends, this is what people are doing, this is what schools and academies are doing. And as you'll see from the top part of this table here, the vast majority of trusts charge a percentage of income. So you'll see in 2020 it was 72%, in 2021 it was 73%. So the top slice is based on a percentage of income for their schools within. You've got other options people do by pupil, time apportioned, or actually direct charges. So if the vast majority of trusts are charging the top slice as a percentage of income, what is that percentage? And that's the table below. So you'll see that the vast majority of trusts, 60% or more than 60%, go with about 5%. There are some outliners on either way, but the majority seems to be in the middle. Now, I got a phone call a couple of weeks ago from a head teacher who's currently doing some due diligence, and they're weighing up options between two different trusts. And this head teacher said to me, Alex, I'm not sure I like this trust. Their top slice is 6.5%, whereas the other one is 4.5%. So I think I quite like the sound of the 4.5%. And I said, okay, that's great. 4.5% does seem better than 6.5%, but you're missing the key point here. And the head said, what do you mean? Well, you haven't told me 6% or 4% of what? He said, well, what do you mean? Well, is it GAG? Is it other income? Is it total income? Because 6% of GAG or 6.5% of GAG could actually turn out to be a lot less money than 4.5% of total income, really. So you have to go back and say, actually, what percentage basis are they charging? So then the second thing, you haven't told me what actually they're providing for that top slice. Because if the one charging you a smaller percentage is providing you with very little support, very little resources in central, whereas the one that's doing 6.5, maybe they do all their training centrally, and therefore you don't have to pay for your training costs from your school budget and it comes out of the central budget, then actually I think I might prefer the 6.5% over the 4.5%. So that head teacher just focused sadly on the numbers. And that's coming from an accountant here that loves numbers, when in reality they should be focusing on what they're getting for the money they're having to pay. What service are provided by the central to give you that top slice? And that should come into the consideration when you're joining or forming trusts. What top slice should you charge? What top slice do you suffer? What do they bring for that sum of money if you're having to give it away to the central service? Very much at the moment, what top slice do the local authorities take and what do they give you back for that top slice? I'm going to move on to GAG pooling now. And I've got a lovely statement on the screen and I'm not going to read it out. You can read it at your leisure here. GAG pooling, in a nutshell, is where instead of taking individual schools' income, and when you're academy, that income in its whole is called GAG, that's the terminology here. Don't ask me why it's called GAG. It's an awful acronym, but the school's income is GAG. So lots of schools go, we'll receive a GAG, that is their income, that is the basis of our budget, and we're going to balance our budget based on our GAG. GAG pooling means actually, instead of that school receiving that income, all of the income goes in the central services pot, and it is up to then the trustees or the team to decide on how that income is distributed amongst the schools underneath. And it might be that school A is a great school, it's doing really well, doesn't need resources, runs a surplus every single year, whereas school B is really challenging, its teaching standards are suffering, they need some more investment, and therefore it enables it to be a little bit easier to direct some money in that direction to that school to bring them up. It's an emotive subject, it's GAG pooling, because obviously schools' money is very protective, but it does seem to be growing in popularity. You'll see on the screen in a moment that actually 14% are GAG pooling. It's still a small number of academies in the grand scheme of things, but I'd be quite surprised if that percentage was not 20% this time next year. And that 20% may go up to 22 or 25% going forward. So it's definitely on an upward trajectory. Lots of people are thinking about GAG pooling. And it's one of those things that you're going to ask or should be asking if you're joining or forming a trust. Do they GAG pool? What's the consequence on us? I'm going to move now on to centralisation, because we've spoken about top slice, we've spoken about GAG pooling, but centralisation is all about what you get for that top slice. It's all about what the central team, central services of the trust does and what their offering is. And here, every single trust is different. There is no one trust that are alike. There are lots of things that will always happen centrally because it's much more efficient to do it that way. Often that is an element of the financial functions. It might be all of the financial functions, or it might just be an umbrella approach of the financial functions. So you might suddenly find that there are still school business managers versus individual schools doing day-to-day processing, putting invoices on, making payments, and then maybe you have a CFO that oversees and directs and makes sure certain things are done from the head office, or equally the head office may do everything, and there may not be a local financial function in individual schools here. But there are lots of things that are done centrally and can be done centrally, and it's up to you to decide on what is right for you, what is right for your trust, what is offered by a trust if you're thinking about joining it, or what you want your central team and services to look like. This can range from HR management, from pooled resources, from trading services. If you have lots of experts that you want to obviously send out to other schools, to support services, to key contracts. You might suddenly say, actually, all of our cleaning contract, we're going to centralize. We're going to have the economies of scale and just go out for one cleaning contract across all of our schools, put it through central, recharge it across through the top slice, because we think that might save all of our schools a lot of money, and it can do so. Centralizing services and economies of scales does come into it with multi-academy trusts, really, because you're buying contracts at higher values. And obviously, you've got a key thing when it comes to centralization, which is the CEO and CIO team. Now, I'm sure Steve Docking will tell you a little bit more about the management team and how they support trusts a little bit later. But they are there to support all the schools within. So how that central system works, how it looks, is very, very different for every single trust and every single school. I'm going to move on now to pension schemes and pension liabilities. And hopefully you're all still with me here and you haven't lost the will to live just quite yet. So there are a number of pension schemes within schools, and those pension schemes are practically the same when it comes to academies. I put 2 or 3 because there can be 3 technically, so I'm just making sure here. The main one that we're all aware of, teachers' pension scheme. Then we have the local government pension scheme, and we have the auto-enrollment pension scheme. People forget about that one. And I'm going to go through each one because each one may have a consequence on your thoughts, your views, and what you need to ask when it comes to conversion if you're looking to converge. So let's talk about the teachers' pension scheme first of all. That's controlled and administered by the Teachers' Pension Authority. It doesn't matter whether you're an academy school, mainstream. They're the people that actually collect the money from you. They're the ones that manage the scheme. And obviously they're the ones that arrange the pensions to the teachers when they finally retire, really. The joy about the teachers' pension scheme is nobody in the world can tell you what your school liability is when it comes to the teachers' pension scheme. So nobody can ascertain how much money your school has paid into the teachers' pension scheme in relation to an employee. And therefore, when that employee retires, whether the amount of money that you contributed as a school is enough to pay for their pension. No one can answer that one because I'm afraid that information is not available. It's not being kept at that sort of level when it comes to the teachers' pension scheme. The one thing I can tell you is the teachers' pension scheme is hugely underfunded. And every year when I'm told how much the pension scheme is underfunded, I fall off my chair because even I can't figure out the amount because there's so many noughts attached to it. 23 billion, I think, was the last figure. It might be even higher than that. Now, I suspect it is. It's a figure I don't even want to think about, to be honest with you. It's huge. But what do you need to know about when you convert to an academy school? You don't need to know about that because it can't be ascertained what your school individual liability is. It doesn't impact on your contribution rates if you convert to an academy school. So that's the benefit of the teachers' pension scheme. What are the rates? Well, the rates have gone up over the last couple of years. We'll all know. We know that the rates are 23.68 for employers, and employees depends on what your salary is, what contribution rate goes in. And as I said, they have gone up, and there was some more money that was directed to the educational sector to pay for that increased contribution rate into the teachers' pension scheme. But when you convert to an academy school, what do you have to do? Well, you have to have all your payments into that scheme checked and audited to make sure that you have actually paid over 23.68%, that you have paid over the right employee rate, depending on the salaries for those employees, into the teacher's pension scheme. And for those that have opted out, you have got the relevant forms and agreements that those teachers have opted out. That has to be done every single year. That has to be audited and checked by an accountant every single year. You haven't got that as a mainstream. You do have that as an academy school. Why? Because it's dealt with at local authority level, and obviously the figures are much higher because they have all of their schools. Whereas here, it's dealt with at a school or a trust level when you convert to an academy school. Now we're going to move on to the local government pension scheme, which is the real reason why I talk about pension schemes here. It's set up by the local authority and it has formal actuaries. What does that mean? It has somebody that manages the pension scheme on your behalf or on their behalf. You don't need to worry about it. And depending on where your local authority is, depends on who your actuary is. It might be Mercer, it might be Hyman Robson's. There's lots of actuaries around the country that manage pension schemes. Unlike the teacher's pension scheme, however, this pension scheme can be quantified. In other words, they can figure out exactly how much money schools have contributed for individuals that are non-teachers, in other words, everybody else virtually, into the scheme, and if that's enough money to pay for them into retirement. Strangely enough, and I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear this as well, the vast majority of local government pension schemes are also underfunded. What does that mean? There's a massive liability attached to them. It's not anywhere near the teacher's pension scheme liability, but it is a liability. If I was to give you any indications, I wouldn't be surprised if a single form primary school had a liability of around about £1 million. It's a huge sum of money. Should you be worried about that £1 million? Because as soon as you convert, you see the figure. That figure is put in your financial statements. You know that £1 million attaches to your school. Are you ever going to be told to write a cheque up for £1 million? No, you're not. Does it have an implication though? Yes, it does. Why? Because schools' rates are calculated, and I think we've got a typo here, are vary significantly. When you're within the local authority, you are given a rate, and you pay that rate as an employer into the pension scheme. Now, depending on your school profile, that rate could be fine. You could be paying quite a low rate with a local authority, but when you convert, that rate could jump up. It could go up higher. Equally, it could go lower. And that rate varies quite significantly. It can be 15%, it can be up to 30% in some cases. And equally, some schools have what we call a lump sum payment. In other words, once they quantify what the amount is, instead of saying, actually, we want your rate to be X, we say, we want your rate to be X, but equally, we want an extra £30,000 a year off you because you've got this massive liability relating to your school that we want back, please. So that's a key consideration here when it comes to the pension scheme is what is your liabilities going to be going forward? What is your contributions? You may not care that you've got the £1 million attached to the school, but you will care what your contributions rates are, especially if they're higher than what you're currently paying. Obviously, you'll be delighted if they go the other way. When it comes to employees, those rates are all set and agreed with unions, so they stay exactly the same. Now, those rates of employers, they're revalued every 3 years, so they can go up or down depending on demographics. So they go up or down both in local authority and individual schools as well. But one thing to consider is what happens to your pension scheme rate if you convert, and how much technically could it cost you? I'm going to move very briefly on to auto-enrollment pension schemes now. You don't often come across them with schools, to be honest with you. You do often come across them in the sort of private sector for many businesses, really. Everybody has to have a pension scheme in place. Most people choose an auto-enrollment pension scheme. Why? Because it's a legal obligation, and you can see the rates. The rates for a auto-enrollment pension scheme are tiny. Employer rates of 3%, yet on the previous slide, 15 to 30%. They're 10 times less here. Where do you normally see them in a school environment? Normally, you see them in nurseries or in trading subsidiaries. So if you're thinking about taking on a private nursery, bringing them into your trust, then often you set up a trading subsidiary, and that way you don't have to enrol all of those staff into the local government pension scheme. They can be enrolled into the auto enrolment pension scheme. It saves you a lot of money, and I'll tell you, every single private nursery out there will be paying over 3%, and certainly not 15% for all of their staff. I'm going to move on now to the next session, which is due diligence. And this is one of the most important things when you're considering academisation. And I'm going to be very old-fashioned here and talk about some old things. But before I do, I'll put 2 paragraphs on the screen which are directly out of the DFE guidance. And the best way of me explaining due diligence here is using a different analogy. If I was to buy a house, if you were to buy a house, what would you do? You'd have to engage a lawyer to make sure that everything was right. You were buying the right things for the right price, and they would probably do a load of searches to make sure it wasn't sat on a coal mine, or there wasn't any subsidence or anything like that. Equally, you might engage a surveyor to look around the house to make sure it's not falling down, there's no major things wrong with it. And that's due diligence, you doing your checks before you do something. Because when you bought it, it's a little bit too late, really. The same thing applies when it comes to forming or joining trusts. It's all about you doing your checks to make sure what's the costs, what's the risk, what's the benefits, what's the assets and liabilities, what are we going to get here? Is it right for us as well? All of those things have to be considered, and that is the due diligence. Yes, the DFE put it a bit more formally on the screen here, and I'll talk you through some of the processes, but it is a long drawn out process. Now, what does the DFE ESFA expect due diligence to look like? In accordance to them, they split it into a 2-stage process, and that is clearly set on their website. You can download it and go through it. There's a best practice guide there, and they split it between Annex 1 template of stage 1 and Annex 2 checklist of stage 2. Don't ask me why, it's the checklist for one and template of the other. But before you get onto that process, before you even start looking at those templates and checklists, I call something here called soft due diligence. This is where I get very old-fashioned, and I'm going to use the word courting only because it's the best way of explaining it, really. It's the getting to know you process here, and I can't stress the importance of this process, which is sitting down, having conversations, discussions with other schools, with other trusts, getting to know them, really. Why? Because that's just as important, if not more important, than any of the other boring stuff that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Really, does your culture work? Is it the right fit? Can you work together? What representation do you get on the board if you chose to join that trust, or if you set up a structure your way? What do you bring to the table? What do they bring to the table if you come together? What's being offered on that top slice? And probably the most important thing here is, how will it benefit the children? How will it benefit educational outcomes? Because that's what we're all about at the end of the day here. Nothing more, really. It's about the children. It's about the stakeholders. It's about the education that we are providing here. And we need to make sure it's right for us. So this soft due diligence stage is the one that schools often miss, really, and they go into the hard due diligence and spend time, effort and money, sadly, without realizing whether they can actually work together, whether they can get on, whether their culture and fit is right. So I can't stress the importance of the soft due diligence. And someone said to me the other day, Alex, I'd like to engage you to do some financial due diligence. We haven't got the experience on our board to do it ourselves. And therefore, could you please come and do some financial due diligence on this trust? And I said, right, how often have you met with the trust? Hardly ever. They've had a couple of meetings between the head teachers and between the chairs. That's it, really. They couldn't talk to me about the trust, about the schools themselves. They couldn't tell me about what their ethos is, what's the culture like, really. And I said, right, I think you're trying to run before you can walk here. Have some more conversations. Have some lovely away days between your governing bodies, between your teachers. See what comes out of it. If you're still happy with all of that soft due diligence, then you can move on to the hard due diligence, the more formal process that you have to do to tick all the boxes to make sure that you still want to go ahead here. If I get onto this hard due diligence, which is the DFE ESFA due diligence here. As I said before, they split it into 2 stages. The first stage is all about information that you can obtain quite easily and quite readily. So it's about education performance, Ofsted reports, financial information, admissions, capacity, pupil numbers. So in other words, you can go in, you can have a look, you can go to the website, and you can download all of that to see where they are, see what information they have on what things you have to consider. You know, when was the last Ofsted? When are they going to get the next one? It may not tell you about their quality of teaching by looking at Ofsted report, because it might have been from years ago. What's the quality of teaching now? But at least you're going to know that there's something you need to look at there, potentially. What's their performance looking like? Have they got a lot of English as an additional language pupil, and therefore there's a need there, and you might be able to help them? Or equally, they may be able to help you because they're brilliant at dealing with people premium children. So that's what the information is there to do, to enable you to do your due diligence on trusts or on other schools, because I'll tell you one thing, they'll be doing their due diligence on you. It's a two-way process here, it's not just all one way. The stage 2 one, sadly, is much more boring, and it goes on absolutely forever here. My team sadly wouldn't let me put all of the items on the slides because it took up about 10 slides. So we just cherry picked a number of things that you would naturally consider here on stage 2. So everything from leadership and governance, what skills, what experience they have, what could they bring to the table, what could we bring to their table, the staffing, the structure, the curriculum, what's their curriculum look like compared to ours? The staff itself, what about pupil ratios? What about deployment of staff? What about TAs? Are they top heavy with UPS teachers? Have they got a lot of teachers that are looking to retire in the short term? How would that then impact if we joined them or they joined us? And this list goes on and on and on, sadly. And there are some things you've got to check. What happens if you decide to take on another school and their building is falling down? You've got a massive headache around you there. Yes, it might be a financial headache, but it's still something you need to consider there. Obviously, you've got the things that you all know about, and if we've got some teachers here on with us, then when it comes to the educational due diligence, you're best placed to do that. You know whether their quality of teaching and learning is up to standard. You know whether they've got some shortfalls in certain areas, and therefore, could you help them, or do they need some support? Could you plug a gap? Could they plug a gap with you? You're the experts there. Who does that due diligence process? Well, every trust is different, every school is different, and it's up to you who does it. You might have experienced trustees or experienced governors, if you're mainstream thinking about converting, who can do that process for you. You might have somebody with finance background that could do the financial. You might have some surveyors on your board that could do the structural and building side. And obviously, you've got the expertise when it comes to teaching, learning, if you're a teacher there as well, and that naturally sits with the schools. I'm going to move on now to systems, software, and reports, and I'm not going to labour this slide too much really here. Time is moving on. Systems and softwares are often centralised and often overlooked when you're talking about conversion. You may have certain things that you can't live without at your school. Well, you need to ask, what happens to those systems? What happens to those pieces of software if we choose to convert? Will they work for us? Will it mean that we can do something different? Do you actually really like what they have, what they use, and therefore you're buying into them? Or equally, is this something that's a deal breaker that you can't live without, and therefore you have to make sure that that is included when you start to join or form a trust? And a lot of those systems hang around 2 areas. We're talking about education, so we're talking about outcomes and how they help with educational outcomes. And the big one that I'm going to talk about here is the financial systems, because it's very different. Your financial systems that you'll have in place for a mainstream school at the moment are not going to be the same when it comes to an academy school, because of all the different things you have to do and all the rigor around it. Yes, there's lots of systems that you would have to look at, have to assess and see what's right for you. I've listed a couple on the screen here, and I'll just cherry pick 2 to talk about. The PSF system is what I call the Ferrari of the academy world when it comes to an accounting system. It's amazing. It does absolutely everything really quickly, but it comes at a Ferrari price. Ouch, that has a huge financial implication. Whereas Xero actually probably still gets you from A to B. Well, it definitely gets you from A to B, I can tell you that here. as a car, it'll get you from A to B. It may not do some of the all singing, all dancing things that PS Financials can do, but actually it's a fraction of the price. So you may say, actually, I quite like what PS Financials does. I really want it to do that. I'm happy to pay the price. Equally, you may turn around and say, I don't need it to do that. It doesn't work for our trust, doesn't work for our schools. And therefore, a cheaper solution that does still gets us from A to B will work. And that's the sort of things you have to assess when you're certainly forming a trust, and then obviously consider when you're joining a trust. There are other things you need to talk about and consider that you don't do as a mainstream. A cash flow system is a real headache. You have to do it as an academy. You don't do it as a mainstream. And obviously, you've got all the other softwares that you use when it comes to parent systems, reporting, and all that sort of things. Now then, that is 1 hour and 22 minutes according to my clock. I've come to the end of my slides. I'm sure you're all delighted about that. If you do have any questions on my slides, please feel free to ask, put them in the chat box, and obviously we'll get them to the end. We're now going to move on to the most interesting part, I think, of today's session, which is a trust perspective. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Steve Docking. He is the CEO of Northwest Academies Trust, and he's going to talk to you about his journey as a trust now. And let's see what he has to say. So hopefully, Steve, you'll be joining us.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you, Alex.
So I will go off camera now, and I will not speak, and I will pass it over to Steve, and he will take you through the next session. Thank you all for listening.
Brilliant, thank you. I've not done one of these before where you're not engaging with the audience at all, but I'll do my very best to keep you interested for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. Just to start us off on our first slide, just some stats, and Alex touched on these when he did his presentation as well. So he's controlling the PowerPoint, so he'll click through. 24,454 schools in England at this moment in time. Of those, LA maintained are 12,224. Academies, 9,836, and as he said, there's more children in academies than there are in maintained schools at the moment, and then independent, 2,394. Of those, 1,170 multi-academy trusts, 26 of them, they all vary in size, 26 of them have more than 85 schools, 85 have between, 26 have more than 85 schools, 85 have between 12 and 25, and then where we sit, 259 schools have between 6 and 11 schools, and 598 have 5 or fewer. Just to put this in context as well, it varies by county. Across Cheshire, West and Chester, where the majority of our schools are based, only 27% of schools are academies, and then in Shropshire, you're looking at 53%. What I'd like to do through the presentation is just talk to you a bit about our journey and what we did really. And I don't want it to be a sales pitch. I just want to talk to you honestly about somebody who really enjoys his job working in academies. If we move on to the next slide, there's going to be 3 parts to the presentation this morning. It'll be a brief history, just talking through, as Phil mentioned at the start, about where I started from. We'll then talk about what I've learned over that period of time in running academies, and then at the end I've got some questions which hopefully you'll find helpful, your choices for the future. I was appointed head teacher at Delamere Academy in 2005, and it was an honour, to be honest. It was my first headship, and it was a little village school, and I thought I would teach PE all afternoon and do a bit of maths and English in the morning and wander around and do very little. But the school had quite a turbulent starting point. In 2007, it was listed for closure, and if any of you have ever worked in a school that listed for closure, it's a really uncomfortable place to be. One of the things when people talk to me about joining a trust, it's always about autonomy and listening about autonomy, and having worked in the LA maintained sector and as an academy, autonomy is something that can be taken away from you, very easily. And I found in my journey that the autonomy that exists in a trust can be better. When you work in a school that's listed for closure, the end is nigh, as they say, and it was very difficult for us as a school, to work through that period. But what we did during that time, with the support of the 2 people in the picture I'll mention in a moment, was we went from a satisfactory Ofsted to an outstanding Ofsted, and closure disappeared. John and Alex Timpson, John Timpson is a member of our trust board, and Alex, his late wife, have been very influential in my career. They invested a bit of cash in the school at that point. They were able to give us £30,000 for 5 years to enrich children's education. And his late wife said, you know, your job is to open children's eyes to the wonderful world of possibility, and that's what we did. The school went from 42 pupils. It's now 168 in full and 4 times oversubscribed on entry, and it's been a very successful starting point for the development of the trust. But the reason for telling you this is that what happened in 2010 was the Liberal and Conservative government came to power, and Michael Gove, who's the then Minister for Education, said that all outstanding schools can become academies. We took that opportunity, and we took it for one reason. When I rang the DfE helpline that existed in those days, they said, you know, I said, can an academy ever be shut? And they said, not unless you shut yourselves. And that was enough for us to join at that point. So if we skip on, please. The next stage was we looked at opening our own school, a free school. So different types of schools, which I'm sure you know exist, maintained schools and free schools and new schools to the academy sector. St Martin's was awarded the chance to be opened in 2012 in line with the Olympics, opened in September 13 and was outstanding 18 months later. When Michael Gove visited the school, you know, he described it as a blueprint for education, and we were incredibly proud of that. But it was a really difficult and turbulent time in terms of opening the school. We then moved on to our next school, which picture of John Bishop there. It's Oakview, Oakview's Academy in Winsford, high percentage of free school meals. Now, this was what Alex described at the start. He said about forced academies. This was a forced academy converted because it was in special measures. And to be honest, it was absolutely right. It was in special measures at that time. You know, the progress of the children wasn't good enough. And we worked incredibly hard to get it to a point and to raise aspirations and make it the school that it is now. It's wobbled a bit through COVID, but you know, it's a solidly good school. The reason John Bishop's in the picture, I wrote to him while I was on holiday, having read his book, because he grew up in Winsford. He didn't go, I think he went to Willowood School, which is at the other side of the town, but he came and presented some awards to us at that time because our role was to raise the aspiration for children. As we move on. Ellesmere, and this is one for you to consider as well. Ellesmere was a school that joined us through choice. It's in Shropshire, and it was good to get a school that was outside of the Cheshire county. And Ellesmere joined us in 2016. It had a lot of debt, and a lot of its debt was unknown to us till after it joined us. Now, Alex would say you should have done your due diligence properly, but actually we did. But they'd taken on teachers that we didn't know who were on their payroll at that particular time after we'd done the due diligence. They joined us with £250,000 worth of debt. Now, we had to pay that back over 3 years from them joining us, and it was painful. If you are thinking of joining a multi-academy trust or setting up your own or whatever route you're taking, one of the things to consider is your own financial health. It would be impossible for us to take a school on now that was in that level of debt, and it may be something that could hinder your development really if you were looking along becoming an academy trust or joining an academy at this time. So next slide, please. Again, within Alex's work, he talked about when trusts fail. And in November 18, we were awarded 2 of the former UCAT schools. For those that don't know, UCAT was the University of Chester's Academy Trust, which started at a similar time to us. And they opened free schools and they took on failing schools as well. But they failed as a trust, and they failed as a trust because of for financial reasons, really, and they didn't manage their schools as well as they could. We were awarded 2 schools to begin with. One was Weaverham, which was called UPOR, the University Primary Academy Trust Weaverham, or words to that effect. The university didn't really engage with their communities the way they should. They called all their schools universities, and you know, it didn't do the job it intended to do of raising standards and aspirations for children. Pupils left, they hemorrhaged, and the schools went into RI or special measures, the ones that they'd taken on. If we click onto the next slide. Grosvenor Park was a school that we had to bid for. When the trust failed and failed spectacularly, we had to put in an additional bid for Grosvenor Park School, which is a school which I'm sat in at the moment, in the middle of Chester. And 30 trusts came in for that school at that particular time. We had to make a strong business case for that school joining our trust. That was the free school that opened at the same time as St Martin's. And again, it wasn't in a good state of repair. Across the 2 primary schools, they had just under £1 million worth of debt, and that had been accumulated from overstaffing and not having enough pupils within them. So we had to discuss with the DfE about paying back that debt and how we did it. And you know, we got to a point where we agreed on a figure of 1/3 of that We then are currently paying back because the schools needed a trust to take them on that could support them through a period to get them to a better place. But the sort of showstopper school, if you like, is the next one. This is our senior school here, and Alex is just going to play the video for us now if we have a look at it. Just wait till it comes on. This is Rudheath Senior Academy. This was called University of Chester Academy Northwich at the particular time. Now, Rudheath, for those that know Northwich, if you know the area, is a part of Northwich. The children are very proud of that they come from this area. The university, unfortunately, chose two things that alienated from the community. It's not in Chester and it's not in Northwich, but as you can see, the school had been set on fire. It suffered a horrific arson attack in February 2018. A disgruntled parent who had an issue with the school came into the school one night on February half term. He set 27 seats of fire in and around the school and tried to burn it to the ground. You can see the damage he caused there with the fire, but what you'd never appreciate until you go into a school like that, it's not just the fire that causes the damage. The smoke damage was total to the entire site. And to be fair to the trust who had it at that particular time, they managed to get the children back in within a week of that fire taking place. But many trusts had turned this down. Many trusts hadn't looked at this school. And I always think when you look at a school that is that bad, and not just physically, educationally as well, I think you can't make them any worse. So for us, it was a gift. And if you look at the school now, as we move on to the next bit, it's been totally rebuilt. The children have fantastic facilities, and we've moved from 343 pupils who were there to the best part of 600 in September. And it's a great place to be. I'll just turn my notes over 1 second. But as you evolve as well, you can't just take on schools that are challenging. Trusts that have all challenging schools, it really is draining to work with, and you need strength. Akersfield School is in Chester, near Chester Zoo. Mike Dixon, who's the leader there, is a great guy. And we, in the previous presentation, they talked about getting to know the schools. This is a shining example of this. We approached another outstanding school to join us because we needed strength and support at this particular time, because you want a mixed economy of schools to work and improve other schools within any trust. Akersfield is a solidly, it's got solid leadership, the staff are great, and they support other schools within our trust. Over probably 2 years, we discussed with Mike how his school could work with us, how it could blend in, how we could, work in partnership, and how we could develop it. And his governors made their decision to join our trust after a 2-year courtship, I would say, and it's been a brilliant decision for him. But they've also benefited from fully immersing themselves within the multi-academy trust as well. It wasn't we just needed them; they've had opportunities to work with us, and particularly with reference to capital funding, which I'll come to later. Next slide, please. And this is the final 2 schools within the 10. This is the Arlat Trust. So this is Acton and Calverley School, which are in Nantwich, and Calverley just side to side Tarpley. This was a small academy trust where they had an executive running it, and they elected to, when that executive got another job in another part of the country, they elected to join a bigger trust. So different schools have joined us at different times, and they've been successful in terms of, we've been successful in terms of working with them because they're a great place to be. One's rated good and one's rated outstanding. But the other thing to consider is both schools are in a particularly poor state of repair with reference to the buildings. And again, we've been able to support them to develop their facilities and develop the sites that they've got. When you work within a trust, or when you look at a trust, and this is what I think, if I was looking now, you should be looking at. This is our central team. You have the schools at the bottom. Each school has its local governing board. There are some trusts that do not have local governing boards, and I would be wary of that, because I think governors add value and huge value to every school. And there are some that can be challenging, shall we say, and there are some that are brilliant. And I think having people to support you who are willing to do so is fantastic. Within any structure, and just for reference point, that structure has people within the component parts. So people management is HR, finance, obvious, school development, safeguarding, and so on. We've got 8 full-time employees, and it's the leanest we can possibly be at the centre, because I genuinely believe in running a trust that the biggest bit that makes a difference is the teacher stood in front of the children. Be wary of trust with massive boards and massive central teams. UCAT, when they failed, had 37 staff at the centre across 6 schools. Everybody was busy, but were they busy doing the right things? Next slide. We've talked about the white paper and we've had brief discussion about it. And for me, when I've read it, and it's long, and there's some good stuff in it, and there's some not so good stuff, but it's what's not written. And if you were looking to join a multi-academy trust now, the first thing that's one of the obvious ones is that 32.5 hours. Now, most people will satisfy that, but the extended school day is something that's been batted around for a long while now. You know, will you need support to extend your day, and how could being part of a trust improve that for you? School culture leaders we've referenced before, and behaviour, you know, the attendance, greater scrutiny on those below key thresholds, and working with the local authority to develop that, and then results and outcomes. Depending on where your school is, 90% is virtually impossible in certain areas. You know, I'm running a trust where the schools are across different boundaries. It's really, really difficult if you're looking at getting 9 out of 10 children to pass tests, and GCSEs at 5-level plus. So when you're considering what the white paper is about and what that will mean in terms of becoming an academy, don't look just at what your school needs to reach some of the objectives that are written in it. And one of the key things, I know there's a few secondary colleagues on the call today, secondary phonics is suddenly a thing. I remember, you know, as a primary teacher when we used to have ELS and FLS and, you know, various programs to try and improve reading. Suddenly, you know, to get 90% at expected level reading, writing and maths, you know, is because there's a lot of children who arrive at secondary school without the skills to get them the GCSEs that they need. So there's going to be a massive shift in education through the white paper. And although we're talking about academies today, look at some of the other issues that you're going to need support with as you develop, and look at where you are currently is part of what I'm trying to say. Next bit. As a trust leader, and this is, I've taken these slides. I went to an event in Birmingham, and the event was very good actually. It was run by our local RSC, and there's an organisation called the Confederation of School Trusts, which we're a member of, and they're great because they're one of those organisations that does the research for you, so you don't have to. They listed out the reasons that people are fearful of joining trusts, and I've just sort of shared them with you today. And these are their words, not mine. But at the next slide, we talk about what the advantages are really. Autonomy I've discussed in terms of my own experience. It was difficult being in a school that was listed for closure, because that everything I believed I'd gone in to be a head teacher for could have been taken away, and I could have been the last one locking the gate, and that was challenging. So when you're considering a trust, you know, what is the autonomy that you need to do your job well, and how can the trust support you with that? Trust not rooted in the community. I've given the UCAT example. We've talked about top slice in the previous presentation, unsure of benefits, governors not clear or supportive. Your governors may not want to join a trust, may be politically opposed to joining academies, or, you know, may not understand what it is they're actually joining. And then the final one, which surprised me when they put this on the board, was you get locked in and there's no chance of a divorce. So if we go on to the next slide, and I'll work bottom up, if you like, on this one. The divorce thing, you know, if you do join a trust and you get wedded to it, knowing you want to get divorced, don't get married. Don't join a trust where you think it's not right for you. And then the other reasons, these are reasons for joining a trust, I would say. You're the custodians of your school at this particular time, and they're going to be there after you've left and for a long time to come. How will you benefit from being part of a trust? How will it improve governance? And then the extended benefits. And this isn't a sales pitch about our trust, but within our slide, you know, from our top slice, we offer counselling to staff. We have a Medicash scheme. We support our staff very well, because one of the things when you take on failing schools, as you notice, is the high sickness rates that exist. And basically, if you haven't got teachers in school and you haven't got staff in school, they're really difficult places to function. So we've put a massive amount and massive drive into the benefits for our staff and making sure we have a happy and healthy workforce. And if I was looking at joining a trust now, that would be one of the key things I would be asking. Top slice is discussed. Ours is between 4 and 6.5%, depending on what you need within your school and what you could benefit from. And what we found is some schools, when they join us in a really bad state of repair, the Rudheath example and so on, they need a massive amount of central input. When you join as an outstanding school, they need a lot less, and they can often help. And then one of the things we're keen on, if a school within the trust works with another school, you know, they do get paid for it. The schools support each other, and the money stays within the system, and it, you know, develops the schools accordingly. And then the other ones are community links, and they're personal to each school. Don't join a trust that you don't think will offer your community what it needs. Next slide. This is in light of the polls. The polls that you did in the last one were interesting. You know, those that want to set up their own trusts, I think, you know, they're the people who are looking to be the drivers, if you like. But where do you want to sit when you join a multi-academy trust? And some people don't want to lead multi-academy trusts, but others do. Next slide, please. Now, I'll go through some of the questions in here because some are more relevant than others and some will help you with your thought processes, really. Alex touched on some of these, you know, with the people in the organisation. You know, some of you may like what I'm saying today, some of you may hate it, you know, and that's perfectly fine because you've got to look at the organisation that's best for you. What are the people like? You know, can you work with them? Can you add to their culture? Can you learn from them and can they learn from you? And then one of the key things is to consider is, are you buying or selling? In our development, we haven't taken on every single school because we've only taken on those that we think we can support best or will add to our ethos and values and we can learn from them. I've met some people when they've come to join our trust who are quite rude, in all honesty, because their expectation is that we serve them, and you know, that's okay, and there's a trust for them that's out there, but they're not the trust for us. So one of the things I think, if I was joining a trust again, you know, the buying or selling, you're probably doing a bit of both. You know, what you're good at as a school could be something that you can offer to the trust. It could be very beneficial. What you can get from them will only make your school better. The other thing as a trust, and I'll show a final slide in a couple of moments, we've been very successful, sorry, just skip back a second. We've been very successful with capital investment. We've managed to get quite a considerable amount of money. In trusts that are over 3,000 pupils, you can't bid for what's called the Conditions Improvement Fund. The Conditions Improvement Fund is where you bid for money to mend your roofs, your heating systems, and whatever else needs mending in the school. And that's vital because if your building's in a bad state of repair, you can't educate the children as well as you possibly can. So one of the things I would think is key for anyone thinking of joining a trust, what's the capital strategy like? How do they work with you to make sure you get what you need? And the same with ICT strategies and so on. And then some of the byproducts of growing as a trust, which have been brilliant. We offer quite a few secondments every year. So people who get hand-tied within one school and then have to leave to get a second school experience can go and get their second school experiences with us, and that's made a massive difference because each school is different within any organisation and we all learn from the different leaders that are within them. Next slide, please. This is just some of the other questions that I would consider, you know, if I was in your seat. I looked at the slide that I showed with our organisational structure and are there too many chiefs or not enough? And that will be personal to you and you'll be able to look at that and decide what you needed. The gag pooling, it would put me off, if I'm being honest. It would put me off if I suddenly thought of joining a trust. But if there is gag pooling in a trust, it could be done for very good reasons. And it may be something that you might want to consider and something you can look at. Your expectations, what do you want? And then I think the key thing, you know, whenever you do any due diligence exercise, do the positives outweigh the negatives. If you find a trust that is all positive and it's 10 out of 10 and it's brilliant, join it. You know, if you find one that's 8 out of 10 and the 2 negatives don't really outweigh it, join it. If it's 2 out of 10 and 8 out of 10 negatives to positives, whichever way round, don't join it. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Just to reiterate in terms of capital investment, this is just to show you, and it's not showing off in any way, but this is the opportunities to funding that we've had in the past few years. So in the past 3 years, you know, we've been able to bid for, you know, and been successful in bidding for the best part of £12 million. Now that's huge. It's a huge amount of capital investment within the schools, and it's made a huge difference to our organisation. The schools benefit from, you know, their new roofs, their heating replacements and all of those other bits that go with it, but so do the parents and so do the children. So I would say capital investment is one of your key considerations if you're looking at joining a trust. Next slide, please. And then this is just the sort of final 2 that we're moving on to now. As an organisation, we try and keep things as simple as possible. COVID has been awful the past couple of years to deal with in all our schools, and it's been very difficult. So we sat down and thought, what are our values as an organisation and what help us get our outputs, if you like, from very simple inputs? So we have sort of 3 very simple rules, if you like. The debt's always hard to manage in any school, so we try and encourage our schools not to go overdrawn. We get value for money. You know, whatever you're doing, get value for money, you know, whatever activity it is. And if you do those two, they always ensure the best outcomes for children. So using that principle, I wanted to move on to the summary, really, of what I think my presentation is about. For me, you know, if you're looking at doing this and you're looking at joining a trust, you know, enjoy the decision-making process. It could be the best thing that you ever do for your school and the best thing that you ever do, whether it's creating your own mat or whatever else, you know, creating your own mat or joining another multi-academy trust. Definitely visit as many schools as you possibly can. Mike from Akersfield, he sent all his staff to all our schools at various different times. And it was, like I said, it was over a 2-year period, and they came at different times of the year. They came to see, you want to know that what you're joining is genuine, that the people in it, people you can work with, and that the schools are real. You're not all perfect every single day of the week, but that the staff are working hard and they get what the job is. And then again, if you join a multi-academy trust, get the most from it. Don't join because you have to, join because you want to. And if you join because you want to, you know, embrace what the trust can offer you, embrace the things that come forward. And that brings me to the sort of final point there. You know, being a trust leader, I thoroughly enjoy it. I enjoy going out to the schools. I'm out and about in schools all the time. I do my very best to make sure that our head teachers are well looked after. We go on trips, we go on visits together, we look at organisational things, and I make sure that, you know, they get what they need. I know how difficult the job of a head teacher is, and I know how multifaceted it can be. So whatever trust you decide to join and whatever you decide to do, you know, make sure it is right for your school and for yourself. And then when you leave your school at whatever key point that is, that your school continues to improve because of what you've done and because of the trust you've joined. And that's me. Okay, thank you for listening, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think we might have Phil joining us back just for the question and answer session. We have had a few questions come through just whilst you were talking, Steve. A few of them might be aimed at me, but I might throw one of them over in your direction really here. So the first one I'm sort of going to cover off now is, if you're establishing your own trust in partnership with other schools, what are the due diligence requirements, and do schools need to do due diligence on each other? Well, in my previous slide, you'll see that the ESFA have got a due diligence template. So if you follow that link, you'll see what the template is for that due diligence process. And should you be doing it on each other? Most certainly. And I think, as Steve has just explained, Akersfield was joining his trust. And I know Steve did his due diligence on Akersfield, but equally, there was a reason why all of those staff from Akersfield went to see Steve and went to see Northwest Academies Trust. And that's them doing their due diligence on Northwest as much as the other way round. It should always be a two-way street here. It should never be one way. It should be both doing that. So hopefully that answers that one, and you can follow that link to the DFE website to go through all the formalities of what due diligence you should be focused upon. One of the other questions I think that's come through on the chat was, does a Diocesan trust work in the same way as an LA trust? An interesting question, because trusts can be set up any which way they want to be set up within the rules. I'll caveat that to a certain degree. And Steve has told you a little bit about his trust and how his trust works and the structure. There are different diocesan trusts around the area. There are some that are just Church of England trusts. There are some that are Catholic trusts. There are some that are mixed trusts. There are mixed trusts with mainstreams. Really, every one of them is different. Every one of them is structured differently. And you need to decide on whether that trust is right for you. Does it work in the same way as an LA trust? I'm assuming you might be talking about representation there, and the answer is yes, an element of representation on the board. You can only have a limited element of representation on the board there. One of the questions that came through, which I think Steve may or may not be able to answer, so I'm going to get him on the hoof here, which is about timing and when is the best time to convert to an academy. Steve, do you have any views on when is the best time from your point of view of converting a school?
Well, if you think of your key terms, we've had schools join us in January, schools join us after Easter, and schools join 1st of September. it doesn't really make any difference because there's a period of time once the decision's been approved by the RSC board where you're a part of that academy while the legal paperwork's taking place. So once you've made the decision, it really doesn't make any difference. I think it's the decision to join might be delayed because everybody thinks the summer is right. And we had a school, Akersfield, for example, joined us 1st of October because they couldn't get all the paperwork through. So, but in theory, from the 1st of September, they're academy, even though they had that 1 month leave. So I don't think it makes any difference.
Oh, sorry, I think we lost you then.
No,
Phil,
did you get most of it? I think, yeah, as I basically said, I don't think it makes any difference.
perfect. I think that's most of the questions that have come through from my end. So I think we'll just pass over to Phil to wrap up.
Yeah, I think that's all of the questions, guys. So thank you very much for answering those questions, and many thanks for a really fantastic session. Very interesting and informative from both of you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Amanda, in the background for making everything work. Can I thank all of our attendees today for joining us? I hope that's been useful, and we'd be really grateful if before you log off, if you could just complete the survey and evaluation form and give us some feedback. If you do need any more information or would like to follow up on anything, you've got all of our contact details there from myself, Alex and Steve. Please get in touch. There are no daft questions, there really aren't. Please just drop us an email and we'd be more than happy to help in any way we can. So thanks for your time, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again at some point. Thank you, everybody.